It's a phrase that always springs to mind when I talk about these things. I once was at a meeting with a government auditor. Yes, there is such a thing. And at a meeting, things were going on, and he actually turned around and said a phrase that I've used many, many times, which is, I will only deal with matters of substance and materiality. And that, to me, is what project management's about. It's about saying, what is it that's actually going to make a difference to what I'm doing? Because if it doesn't, why am I bothering with it? Why am I even concerned with it? Put it to one side and get on with what project managers call the critical path. And it's identifying that critical path that's the key to successful project management. Once you've got that, you're in a much stronger position in terms of what you need to do, because it points straight at you. Oh, those are the critical things. How do I deal with them? Now, obviously, once you've got there, you constantly need to review that, because it's changing, impacts change, either external dependencies, lots of things change. So it's simply having an eye on what is it that matters, that's material and of substance, that will actually make a difference. I think another thing is difficult within, again, third sector, but lack of skills and a proven approach to project management and risk management. Management generally, to me, is risk management. Whatever management function you're looking at, it's risk management. You might call it, HR will manage risk, but they don't call it that, they call it something else. That's great. But if you have somebody who's never done a project and doesn't quite understand the concept of risk management, you will struggle. To structure the project in a deliverable sense of, what tranche of work do we do now, what follows, what makes sense. So your dependencies make sense. But also in terms of how that person or those people manage that project. Now, if I could take it in a very simplistic way, everybody does project management. Everybody goes shopping. That is project management. It's got a beginning and an end and a set of outputs. That's it. That's all you do. And it's as simple as that. Yes, some people do go in the shops and sometimes buy things that they didn't intend to buy. Well, that is what project managers will call scope creep. Well, you're bringing something in you didn't actually intend to do. Be very careful of scope creep. And that, again, is something that a project manager worth the salt should actually be identifying. I think another aspect is where you go headlong into what you say you're going to deliver. So you effectively develop tunnel vision. Be aware that breaking developments and implementation issues are key. So things may well develop outside of that you couldn't anticipate. Be aware of them. Identify them very, very quickly if you can. Assess the risk to your project. And if there's no risk to your project, fine, ignore it. But if there is a risk, have another look. Reassess where you're going and what you're doing. And that might be, for example, you're relying on a volunteer to do something and that volunteer, for whatever reason, can't do it. And that may be a key part of what you're trying to deliver. Recognise it, identify the risk, quantify it, manage it and get on with it. Project management is about, again, it's back to Pareto, the 80-20. 80% of your time as a project manager is planning for things to happen. And that seems very boring and it just seems as if nothing's going on and so on and so on. Once the project hits critical mass, and in that year-long program, let's say, for example, that's October, so, 80% of the way through, suddenly it hits critical mass. The thing rockets. The last 20% of the project really runs away from you because you've got timelines and costs and deliverables. If you haven't got the 80% bit right in terms of your planning, you cannot control it once it hits critical mass. So don't be worried that in the early stages it doesn't quite seem to shape up or form too much, because that will come. You just have to be conscious that you've done the planning, so when it hits the critical mass point, it's not a train out of control. You can actually see where it's going, and your previous work keeps it on the tracks.